Okay, here we are. Another Monday, another weekly recap. As usual, I'll start with the 3 tech talks for the week. The first is in Freehold and has to do with the first boss, Sharkbait. Before you pull Sharkbait and during the second phase of that fight, Sharkbait will continuously pelt your party with poop. This poop can be especially dangerous, especially if it overlaps with other mechanics during the boss fight. Because of this, you'll want to introduce some consistency during the fight. An important thing that you need to note about it is that it always targets the player closest to Sharkbait. Normally, during the boss fight, Sharkbait poops at somebody after he finishes charging. So he finishes his charge, ends up on the other side of the room, and poops the closest player. Unfortunately, this task is normally relegated to the healer. Good healers should always try to stand to the right of the arena and bait the vomits. Another important detail is that you'll always want to try to bait this on a ranged player, as if it goes to melee, it hits melee DPS and the tank together, something you would generally not prefer. The second tip is in Neltharion's Lair. If you've been doing a lot of M+, you might have already heard about this. It made the rounds quite a bit over the past week. This one has to do with the start of the dungeon. If you are on the water slide to the bottom when the key starts, at first you'll be teleported back to the dungeon entrance, but you will immediately snap down back to the slide and all the way to the bottom of the slide. Doing this successfully can shave off quite a few seconds off your time. And everyone can do this. The person who has the key has to put their key in but not activate it yet, and then start a countdown. At 3 seconds left, everyone jumps into the water slide. Then at 0, while everyone is on the water slide, the key holder will activate the key. No one gets left behind and you start the key a few seconds quicker. It's a cute little trick. The third and final tech of the week is not so much a tech, but more of a really important boss mechanic. This one is specifically the first boss in Brackenhide Hollow. More specifically, Gashtooth. If you've been doing a lot of Brackenhide keys, you might have noticed that this boss is pretty dangerous. When the fight starts, about 2 or 3 seconds in, Gashtooth will jump to every player, dealing a lot of damage and applying a disgusting bleed. The bleed gets removed if you have over 90% health. And let me tell you, that bleed destroys you. A single healer will have a very difficult time trying to keep up, which is why it's extremely important that you utilize everything you can in your class kit. If you're a dwarf, use your racial. If you're an evoker, use cauterize. If you have off-healing abilities such as vampiric embrace or ancestral guidance, you should use them. Mages can use alter time or ice block. Use everything you can to make sure you don't go below 90%. The bleed must get removed as fast as possible. Generally, the fight lasts long enough that the boss casts it at least 2 times. Something I like to do is save my health pot for the second set of jumps. The second I take damage and receive the bleed, I use a health pot just like that. It should, in most cases, immediately remove the bleed. This boss is deceptively healer heavy. If DPS are not using defensives and utility appropriately, there is almost nothing your healer can do. And that wraps up our tech talk of the week, and let's go straight into the updates. As usual, let's try to do this chronologically. The first hotfix of the week is a small Mythic plus nerf. A minor nerf to Forgemaster Gorek in Neltharion, a slight nerf to the health of the totem spawned by Bromak in Uldaman, and a slight nerf in the health of the Skyfall Nova on the last boss of Vortex Pinnacle. If you ask me, I think they need to nerf Neltharion a bit more. Neltharion is definitely one of the harder tuned dungeons this season so far. I've seen more bricked keys there than any other dungeon. Next, and one that I'm very excited for, is the next set of 10.1.5 patch notes. And this one comes with Fire Mage updates. I'm just going to quickly mention some other PTR changes that isn't so relevant to me. Augmentation Evoker is receiving tuning as expected, a change to Devastation Evoker to make it less reliant on Mastery, reducing the value they get from Mastery, and granting them a blanket 6.5% damage buff. That's massive. Okay, let's talk about Mage. Flame Strike is baseline. Flame Strike had its cast time reduced, Pyroblast had its cast time reduced, and Cauterized is baseline as well. I can't express how much I'm looking forward to shorter cast times on Pyroblast. It was always a bad feeling when you had to cast a 4-second Pyroblast and the enemy dies. Of course, if I was a good player, I would target a high health mob to Pyroblast, but let's not talk about that. A few talents were introduced to make Flame Strike more appealing, and here's a good one. There's now a talent called Surging Blaze, and it reduces the cast time of your Pyroblast and Flame Strike by an additional 0.5 seconds. So if nothing else changes, Fire Mage can cast Pyroblast in 3 seconds, a 25% reduction in cast time. Just blows my mind, that's insane. Pyroclasm is dead. It is being removed entirely. It seems to have been moved into Sun King's Blessing. Sun King's Blessing now causes your next Pyroblast or Flame Strike to deal 300% more damage. That's pretty good. And here's a good one. Sun King's Blessing now lasts 30 seconds. It's generally a sign of bad play, but sometimes I do find my Sun King's Blessing dropping off mid-pull. And it is a really bad feeling. You lose a lot of damage if you miss a single Sun King Blessing. New talents to support new playstyles, and a few other minor changes. If you're interested in reading it yourself, feel free to go to the link in the description. More changes to Holy Paladin. As expected, they are receiving a rework. Some changes to mana costs on Shadow Priest. And lastly, here's one that I'm not too familiar with myself, but did cause quite a stir in the community. Among several changes for all 3 Warlock specs, Demonology seems to have had quite a change. And judging by the reaction from the community, not a good change. There was massive pushback because it seems the changes made it so you cast your filler more frequently, resulting in a less interactive playstyle which I'm sure several people did not like. It wouldn't happen for another few days, but Blizzard did respond and it seems they're going back on several changes. And it seems this has satisfied the community generally. Again, I'm not a Warlock expert. If you play Warlock yourself, I highly recommend reading through the notes yourself and making judgments before you read online discourse, so that you have an entirely unbiased and personal point of view. Generally good advice for balance changes. Next is a quick little hotfix to several trinkets from old raids, specifically in this case from Firelands. If you didn't know, it's currently Cataclysm Timewalking, and during certain Timewalking campaigns, you can actually play through old raids as if they're current content. You'll be scaled down and receive loot that is on par generally with these days' normal raids. In this case, you can receive old trinkets at champion level. This means they can go up to 437, which isn't bad if the trinkets are really good. And really good some of them were. It seems Blizzard doesn't want to force players to have to grind old raids, so several of these trinkets were nerfed. I wouldn't be surprised if some classes have best in slots in old raids. The 3 that I know of that you can do in Timewalking are Black Temple, Firelands, and Ulduar. Take a look at those raids, and see if any of their trinkets is worth using today. This next update pertains more to raid, but it is pretty big, so I'll mention it real quick. Zkarn, which I would describe as the 3rd hardest boss in the raid, which, to be fair, isn't saying much, was considerably changed from how he was last week. Apparently there was this cheat spot going around where you could bait the boss, and you would trivialize the fight basically. You could ignore a whole bunch of mechanics, and you just had to stand there. Well, Blizzard put a stop to that, changing some of the boss mechanics, and quickly patching what I would call yet another exploit. Lastly, a set of unfortunate news. Or at least it became unfortunate a couple hours after this news came out. Well, Death Knights and Warriors were the only 2 classes not to have some sort of class utility to deal with Incorporeal. Well, for a brief moment after a hotfix, Death Knights were able to mind control these Incorporeal mobs. When you mind control them, you can use their ability and affect enemies, reducing their damage dealt by 5%, which is pretty good. Unfortunately, this was bugged. While yes, the first cast of the mind-controlled mob reduces the damage of all enemies by 5%, the second cast would reduce the damage of all enemies by 100%. You can see why that's broken, and you can also see why they quickly reverted this change. It's unfortunate that it is reverted, but there's a good chance it will come back over the coming weeks when they've sorted this bug out. Warriors would be able to Shattering Throw one of the mobs, dispelling the immune and making them disappear. Of course, the problem here is that Shattering Throw is on a 3-minute cooldown, but at least now Warriors have some way of dealing with Incorporeal. Or at least they will have one when they re-implement this change. That's all the news for this week, and now the part about myself. I'm going to be completely honest. I'm pretty sure I burnt myself out playing too much the first 2 weeks of the season. Normally, I can't wait to go into a Mythic Plus and crush it with my party. Not so much this time around. it didn't seem appealing to me. Maybe the dungeons are too hard, maybe I'm not familiar with them. I can't really quite put my finger on why I didn't want to play as much this week. But even then, I think I did play a reasonable amount. I did my weekly raid of my guild, I got a few 20s down on my mage, I did our weekly normal alt run, which was fun. I finally have my 4-piece on my Disc Priest, and from the brief time I had using it in that raid, it was really strong. Oh, I can't wait to use it in a dungeon. It's gonna be great. If I didn't feel like playing WoW, what was I playing? Well, I played Control. You may have heard of it. It's a AAA game where you play this lady who has superpowers, basically. And you go around defeating a mind-controlling enemy. It was pretty fun. I managed to finish all achievements for the game, and after receiving my fill of paranormal activity, I put it down and I deleted it. I am now looking forward to playing more next week. Maybe it was because this week was tyrannical. It's always much harder. And after absolutely slogging through a Neltharion 18 in the first week, maybe deep down I knew this week would not end well. Whatever the case, that's this week's episode. If you enjoyed this, feel free to leave a like or subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in my next weekly WoW recap.